Episode 1085, Adventuring as a Family. Hi friends, thank you for listening in or watching on YouTube, the Adventure Sports Podcast today. Today is a very special episode, and you'll know why at the end, but I am going to do this episode solo for a very special reason. But the subject of the episode today is how adventure sports can be so beneficial for families and for developing youth as they grow from young people into adults. And we all benefit in a lot of ways from adventure sports. We challenge ourselves, we gain strength and dexterity, we learn how to reach beyond what we think might be our limits. We learn things like self-confidence and self-reliance and a new level of security. We learn to conquer fear. We learn how to be capable and to think ahead and to plan ahead and to be safe and how to connect with things bigger than ourselves and have experiences that we can't necessarily explain. And adventure sports enlarge our lives. They really do. But adventure sports are so great for families. Wow, before we continue, I almost forgot to mention, this is very important, credit where credit's due, right? All the music on this episode was composed by my son, Caleb Linville. And it's available online. You can go to itch.io, and you can also download the music package that contains all of these songs and many others. So if you're interested, that's where the music came from. And today I'm going to share several stories about adventures that I had with my own kids. But there's one of my children in particular that I'm going to focus on, and you'll find out why at the end. Our firstborn son, Caleb, was born in 1997. And we chose Caleb because it means faithful and tenacious. It also means dog, but it means faithful like a dog or tenacious like a dog. And we just like the strength of that name. Caleb was just a little guy. Actually, he was 6 months old when we moved from Denver up into Cold Creek Canyon to 8,240 feet, where we lived in the forest and began a 20-year adventure of living in the forests southwest of Boulder and northwest of Golden. And there, Caleb's sister Lydia was born, and then their brother Daniel was born, and then their brother Luke was born, and we remained in Cold Creek Canyon for, like I said, 20 years raising our family in the forest. And that meant that I had to drive to the city every day for work. It was a long commute, which was very, very hard, but I really believed in connecting with nature, and I really wanted our family, our children, to be comfortable in nature and to know that nature is their true home. So, in the wintertime, I believe it was our second winter in Cold Creek Canyon, Caleb was just a little tyke, 2 years old. He was a toddler. And I would dress him up warmly, and we'd go on little mountain adventures in the snow. I'll tell you 3 stories real fast. But the first is, Caleb and I would like to hike around the woods around the house. And we wouldn't go all that far, but we would be hiking along, and I'd be holding his little hand because it's hard to get through the snow. But he learned how to navigate in those conditions, and he really loved it. That's story number 1. Story number 2, one day a blizzard came in, and the snow was coming down so fast, and all the roads were covered with about 8 inches of snow. There was no traffic. And so I put Caleb in a toboggan all bundled up, and I pulled him for miles on the roads in the blizzard, and we enjoyed the snowstorm together. But we ended up on top of a mountain about 1.5 miles from home. And I remember I grabbed a stick that I could use as a brake, and I got in that toboggan behind Caleb, and we took off through the blizzard down the mountain, and literally had a 1.5 mile toboggan run all the way home. And I remember we got going so fast, and he was so little, the snow was stinging my face, so I was trying to steer with one hand while I had my other hand in front of his face so the ice crystals wouldn't sting his cheeks. But this is the way that our kids grew up. And a lot of people in Colorado like to do that. They like to make sure that their kids get to know nature and get to know adventure and fun and what mountain life is about. That was really important to us. A third story. I was in downtown Denver at work, and actually I believe that it was lunch, and the phone rang, and it was my wife, Ann. And she was very, very upset. I could barely understand what she was saying. But I finally deciphered, he's gone, I can't find him. And this was before Lydia was born. So that means that Caleb was very, very little, barely 2 years old. But this was the time when he was accustomed to going on adventures in the snow in the mountains with Dad. And my first thought was, he's gone alone, but he's too little to find his way home again. And in the middle of winter like that, it gets dark very early and it gets very, very cold. And I was about a 45-minute drive from home. And I was thinking to myself, how far can a toddler travel in the woods in 45 minutes or an hour? And I realized that if he made it a mile from the house, which would be the range that, we often went, then that would mean we'd have 4 square miles to search. And I thought, what if he goes beyond that? If he made it 2 miles from the house, then we have 16 square miles to search. So I jumped in the car, and forgive me, I was not legal, though I was safe. I made it home in record time. I never made that journey so fast. And he appeared. We, to this day, do not know where he had gone, and he wasn't old enough to explain it. But Ann had called 911, and the fire department had been searching for him, and I showed up to join the search, and all of a sudden, he was just standing there with the rest of us. What's going on? Terrifying. But I tell that story because Caleb always has had an independence and a sense of adventure and bravery, especially in the out of doors. And I think that story illustrates not only that he was brave, but that he was also very capable at an age when he was so young he couldn't even explain to us where he had been. It's fascinating because the rest of his life is kind of marked by those traits of bravery, tenacity, self-reliance, skill. As Caleb grew up more, we did bigger and bigger adventures. I think he was 3, and I might have that age incorrect, but I think he was 3 when we bought lift tickets and took him skiing for the first time. And we had a delightful day. It was really, really fun. But Ann and I decided at the end of the day that it was very expensive to teach a 3-year-old how to ski, because mostly what you're doing is standing on the snow trying to teach them and encourage them. And he was really too young. They may not be old enough to really ski. But they learned the balance, they learned the body position, they learned the things that are necessary that makes them very comfortable learning to be a skilled skier later. But a few years later, Caleb was an avid skier, and we had many ski adventures. Caleb was born on February 10th, and because of that, his birthday fell in the best ski month of the year. And quite often, for his birthday, Caleb would say, "Dad, let's go to this new resort or that new resort," whether it was Copper Mountain and the epic double black back bowls, or it was Vail, or, we skied a lot of places, but he always chose one where we didn't go all the time. And we had just such amazing times. I remember, I don't know how old he was. Maybe this was his 10th birthday. We went to Copper Mountain and we hiked up to the top of the mountain and skied the Union Bowl together. And I just remember how, as a dad, how excited I was to watch my young son navigating that expert terrain in deep powder. It was just coming down. A beautiful, beautiful day to ski. But we connected. And maybe that's the thing that I really want to talk about with youth and adventure sports. Some people talk about quality time versus quantity time. And obviously quality time is great. It makes a world of difference, but you can't plan for quality time very easily. Quality time is kind of like happiness. If you try to force it, you lose it. It's like Quicksilver, it just flows through your fingers, although you shouldn't handle that stuff. Mercury is not good for you. But chasing after quality time with your kids, great. Pursue quality time, but don't think that you can plan it and force it to happen. Happiness happens when you're doing other things and suddenly you realize, whoa, I am really happy right now. But if you try to be happy, that's hard to pull off. And quality time is the same way. The way you get quality time with your family is through a quantity of time spent together. And when you go and you do exciting, fun things together as a family, then magical moments happen. And the quantity becomes quality, and you have experiences together that you'll remember for the rest of your life. Like Caleb skiing down the Union Bowl. I'll never forget that. It was his first really big bowl like that, and he just killed it. He didn't fall. Matter of fact, he had beautiful pow turns and just cruised down the expert terrain. Well, when Caleb was 13, we decided to go on our first big backpacking trip together. And we decided to go to the Holy Cross Wilderness and to hike in there to a place called Middle Lake. Now, I had been to Middle Lake before, and what's odd about it is there is a trail supposedly that goes to Middle Lake, but the trail kind of feathers out and fades, and there are blazes on trees, but they go in all directions, and the footpath just vanishes amongst the wildflowers. And so as you're going to Middle Lake, you can't just follow the trail. And it's a long hike in. I think it's somewhere around 7 miles, if I remember correctly. And the trail goes up to above tree line just barely, over 12,000 feet. And then it dives down a steep embankment deep into this mountain lake, which is a little bit over 11,000 feet high. But as Caleb and I were going in, before the trail disappeared, we decided to take a shortcut and just meander through the forest and go off trail. And I had actually never been to the lake on the trail because, like I said, it disappears anyway, but I had been to the lake before. But the shape of the valley said to me that the lake had to be a little bit down valley from us. So we headed that direction, and there were some cool experiences that I want to relate. The first is we found a coffee can. Now, that doesn't sound so exciting, except this coffee can was so old that I had never seen the brand ever advertised. And I had never seen a can of that shape. And I had never known that kind of coffee. And it occurred to me, this fell off of a prospector's mule maybe 100 years ago. And that connection with history, Caleb and I wander, On the way up, there's a tiny little prospector's cabin that's only about 4 feet tall, maybe 5 feet tall. And it's along a beautiful stream. And I know for a fact that mountain lions live along this stream because I've seen their den and I've smelled them. Haven't seen them, but I'm sure they saw me. Anyway, we went to this prospector's cabin and just kind of connected with a heritage. People of the forest, people of nature, people of the mountains, men and women of strength and courage who would go deeply into the unknown to see if some of them were looking for gold or other precious metals or gems, but I think many of them were looking for something else. Maybe they were looking for peace or meaning or opportunity, and they thought that Mother Nature would provide it. We had a lot in common with these people, Caleb and I, as we went into the wilderness together to encounter Mother Nature, to experience it in amazing ways. We came to a high overlook, and I remember talking to Caleb about, we always did these kinds of conversations. We had deep conversation, but this time it was science, so there was absolutely no one there, and it was safe. So I dropped a rock off of this cliff, and we counted the seconds until I hit the ground. And then I explained to him how you can calculate, using physics, how high the cliff is based on the acceleration due to gravity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he's always so patient with me to listen to stuff like that. But while we were at this high overlook, Caleb looked down and he saw an animal. And he had never seen this animal before. And I missed it because it hurried off into the bushes. But I started asking Caleb what it looked like, and I said, well, was it a badger? No, it was not a badger. Was it a bear? No, it was not a bear. Was it a marmot? No, way bigger than a marmot. And when we got back home, we looked at pictures of the animals. I just couldn't believe that this is what he saw, because they were not known to live in Colorado. Matter of fact, it was thought that there were only 3 of them left in the United States, at least in the lower 48. Do you know what the animal is? A wolverine. We spotted a wolverine where wolverines aren't supposed to live. And Caleb was able to positively identify it. Absolutely, that's it. And I also believe him because I know a man that did a biology study in this area and actually did document wolverine tracks. So what an amazing experience to see an animal in nature scurry away from us that people thought was extinct in this area. Maybe they still think it's extinct. It's here. We've seen it. We worked our way down the valley more, down the little precipice that we were standing on, and we got into these beautiful blue spruce forest. And this valley around Middle Lake, where Middle Creek goes down, it's very, very lush. And the trees were amazing, but there was so much deadfall just from centuries, millennia of trees growing and falling and being struck by lightning and knocked over by furious storms and knocked over by avalanches and all the ways that trees can fall. They had fallen for so long, but they were stacked on top of each other like pickup sticks, tangled together such that we couldn't walk on the ground. So we had to walk on the trunks, and here we were with our backpacks trying to balance, but we walked what seemed like miles on tree trunks, crisscrossing everywhere, because it was the only way through. But as we went through this balance beam hike, we came upon a spruce tree, and I've never seen a tree in Colorado that big before or since. But this spruce tree, it was the size of the small redwoods or cedar trees that you can see in the Pacific Northwest. You know, the ones that 2 people can't touch hands around. This spruce tree was so big, and we stood in awe. It was like the grandfather or the grandmother of the forest. And you know, it's been shown now that old-growth trees like that actually nurture their offspring, and they communicate needs, and they communicate different tree things actually through the root systems using I believe mycelia, if I remember that correctly. But trees will actually prefer their own offspring and deliver nutrients through the root systems to these tiny little trees that are trying to grow under grandfather or grandmother spruce. We put our hands on that trunk, and we're just so impressed by the sheer size of a living thing that huge, that ancient, whose time traveled more slowly than our own, who had seen centuries of history that we'll never see. Maybe saw the coffee can fall off of the mule. We don't know. But we were getting very, very, very tired at this point. It was late in the afternoon. No lake. Now, this might sound cocky. I didn't bring a map. I didn't bring a compass. I just simply hiked into the woods because I'd been there before. I knew where I was going. We hiked until we were exhausted. No lake. And we started to feel defeated and disappointed. And I especially felt bad because I had promised Caleb that we would go to this mountain lake, this beautiful mountain lake with precipitous cliffs all around it. We couldn't find it. We hiked and hiked and hiked, and then it occurred to me. This was a life lesson in the making. This was something we needed to experience together. And I looked at Caleb and I said, look where we are. We kind of turned in a circle and looked at the cathedral around us, with steeples of spruce trees touching the skies, and the beautiful, beautiful mountain stream gushing and laughing and spilling over the rocks, trying to talk to us if we could understand its language. The ground was thick with fallen pine needles and pine cones and mosses and the types of wildflowers that can grow with a little bit of light that peeks through the canopy. We took a deep breath of the most pristine, pure mountain air that you can imagine. And I said, why are we looking for a lake when we're already in paradise? We quit looking forward to the goal that we had to attain, and we returned to the present moment. And joy returned. And we decided to camp right there in that place instead of looking for the lake. And so we pitched the tent, we laid out the sleeping bags, we made dinner, and we enjoyed that stream and the wonder of the forest we were in. The forest that held such secrets as a many hundreds years old spruce tree and a wolverine that was supposed to be extinct. Glorious beauty. And a wonderful time, and we cheered up, and we had a father-son quality time experience unlike you would have by planning it. You never could have planned such a time as this. And we learned that being where you are sometimes brings more joy than looking forward to where you're trying to be. Being in the moment, it matters. You know, that weekend was way too short. And when it came time for us to hike back out again, we headed up the bluffs that we had come down. And when we got almost to the top, almost to a saddle, this is important. Caleb's first backpacking trip. I took off in a direction saying, well, we're going to intersect the trail. We'll go this way and hit the trail. And after just a little bit, Caleb stopped me and he says, Dad, where are you going? I was like, what do you mean, where am I going? I'm going to the trail. He goes, no, you're not. And I looked at the sun and got my bearings and realized I was hiking the absolute wrong direction. Caleb has a compass in his head. I don't know how it works because I don't have one, but On his first backpacking trip, we're hiking off trail without a map, and I was getting us lost and didn't even know it. But my young son, with no experience, straightened me out. And sure enough, we had to make about a 100-degree turn, and we hiked straight through the trail, and then we hiked back out again. But that's Caleb. We had so much fun doing that trip together. I hope that as I tell these stories, you're getting the gist of it. This isn't about me. It's a little bit about Caleb, and I'll tell you why later. It's about families. Families having experiences together that are life impacting, that change our character, that help us to learn more about who we are and what matters. You know, a few years later, I believe Caleb was 15, and he came to me. Now he had been on many backpacking trips, mostly weekend trips. But he came to me and he said, my cousin Stephen and I want to go on a solo backpacking trip. And it was an extended trip. I don't remember how many days. I think it was about a week. Maybe it was 5 days to 7 days. Neither of them had ever been backpacking without an adult, usually me. But they felt like they were ready. And Caleb was 15 years old, and Stephen was 16. They're 9 months apart. And they decided to go to the Gore Range, Eagle's Nest area, and they wanted to backpack all the way to Slate Lake and spend the majority of the week, if not the whole week, in these rugged peaks of Colorado, just the two of them. And they're old enough to be capable. But I was a little bit worried about experience. Even though I'd taken them backpacking, I had always been there for the emergencies. And I realized I hadn't really taught them what to do. So we decided to take a short little overnighter backpacking trip, the three of us. And I said, the purpose of this trip is for me to try to show you what to do in emergencies. So we had all kinds of emergencies on that trip. I believe I sprained my ankle. I broke my leg. I had a heart attack. We had bad reactions to bee stings. We had dehydration. We had hypothermia. We went through all the things, right? We went through the idea of decision making wise decisions, and realizing that you might be able to do something if you push yourself to your limit, but you should probably not take chances and attempt that if you're in a situation where it could be life-threatening or perilous if you failed. So you dial it back a notch so you're well within your capabilities. You give yourself a little bit of margin for life. Think about that. So Stephen and Caleb and I went on that backpacking trip, and I shouldn't tell this part, but I have to. We got to a mountain lake, and I wanted just to dive in and feel the cold, icy water. And so I stripped down my shorts, and I dove in the lake, and I don't know how it happened, but somehow I filled my shorts with mud. I still to this day, I didn't think I hit the bottom, but I've got my shorts full of mud. No one's around. We're alone, mountain lake. So you know what I had to do? I had to strip down and wash everything off. And sure as the world, Stephen looks over at me and says, "Hey, Caleb, look, your dad's mooning us." Terribly embarrassing. But again, a moment we won't forget that they can make fun of me for the rest of my life. And that's sometimes a quality moment too, right? Stephen and Caleb went on that backpacking trip. Stephen was barely 16. Caleb was 15. And they went into the woods for 6 or 7 days and went miles and miles and miles in places they had never been before. And they hiked back out right on time. We picked them up. Life was good. You know, it takes quite a lot of training for a person to be able to go on an extended trip like that. Especially when there's a network of trails and terrain and mountains and valleys and rivers and streams that turns into a labyrinth once you get up there. It's not easy. to find your way on some of these trails without having quite a bit of navigation experience, but they did it. And I heard many stories about what they were doing, and I'll relate one that I know is a super special experience for them. They ended up spending the night in a forest that pine beetles had wiped out. So there were just dead standing trees. Kind of spooky. And they knew better than to camp right under a tree that could fall. We call them widowmakers for obvious reasons. But a tree that could fall in the night. But they were still amongst these lifeless trees. And that morning, it was cold, it was quiet, and a fog had settled into the valley and was moving through those trees. And as the fog drifted through those trees, eerie, silent, the hush, like you can only experience in a very remote place, in a forest, in a fog, a giant, huge bull moose came meandering through those dead trees, working his amazing antlers, rocking side to side to get between the trunks. And he walked right up to Stephen and Caleb, who knew better than to mess with him. But they kind of acknowledged each other. The moose saw them, they saw the moose, and the moose respected them, and they respected the moose. And he drifted off like a spirit through the fog and through the trees. I get shivers, and I wasn't even there. But Caleb and Stephen have this memory for life. They're cousins, but they were also brothers. On a level, they were brothers, and having experienced something that special together bonded them. And that's what happens when we do adventure sports with our families. It wasn't long after that my wife decided that Caleb should become a mountain bike racer. Notice how I said that. Caleb had biked, but he never had a good mountain bike, and we lived in a place with no trails, so we just biked around on the dirt roads in the mountains where we were. But Anne had seen mountain bike racing when she went to college at Fort Lewis in Durango, Colorado. And she saw Caleb and said, "You are a mountain biker, I can tell by the way you look." And she was encouraging him to sign up for a mountain bike racing team in Golden. And not where a school where Caleb went, by the way. And Caleb was apprehensive. I mean, he didn't know anything about racing. He knew very little about mountain bikes. He didn't know any of the other students, and he did know that he would be joining a team where they all knew each other and they didn't know him. Talking about intimidating. I don't know. It's hard to do these things, and I know that young men and women have to do these things often, and they do it. They figure it out. But for Caleb, it was a real opportunity. An opportunity for him to stretch himself and to learn his namesake, tenacity. We got Caleb a little mountain bike. He joined the team, started training with the team, learned camaraderie, got to know his teammates, had amazing coaches, learned so much about mountain biking, became very, very good at it, started racing mountain bikes, and eventually grew into a better mountain bike, and he became a very, very solid racer. And in these extremely athletic events. These are the type of mountain bike races where you leave all of it on the trail. When you cross that finish line, you've got nothing left. And one day after a big race, with dirt caked all over his face from the dust that had stuck to his sweat, he would smile and his teeth were muddy from breathing the dust of all the bikes behind him and in front of him. And anyway, it was just a cloud of dust as these young people would race through. It's so beautiful to see them. And parents cheering, and the crowds are just coming alive and so excited for these young people who are giving it their all and learning how to give it their all. Adventure sports. But after the race, we have a picture of Caleb caked in the mud, dripping with sweat. And when we asked him how the race went, he said, when it got really hard, I remembered my name. He said, I remembered my name meant tenacious. And he said, when it got hard and I felt like I couldn't go anymore, I just said, I am Caleb, over and over again. That's Caleb. We started climbing 14ers when he was young as well. And his first 14er, I don't know how old he was. Can't even remember, 10, 11? I don't know. But I decided to climb Mount Huron with him because Huron has a lot of bang for the buck. It's an easy mountain to climb if you have an adequate four-wheel drive to get to the trailhead. It's an easy mountain to climb, but the views are some of the best of all the 14ers in Colorado. There are many beautiful views, but Huron's got them because Huron looks into the Apostles, these jagged, precipitous peaks that divide that part of the Sawatch Range from Taylor Park, where Taylor Reservoir is, that you might know about. So we climbed up Huron, starting at daybreak, like you do. And we got to the top, and Caleb looked at me and he said, that didn't feel like a 14er. He'd never been on one before. But it was an easy mountain for us, and we were feeling strong that day, and it went really, really well, and it wasn't very long, and he just imagined 14ers to be bigger than that. Because that just didn't feel like a 14er, Dad. Although we thoroughly enjoyed it, I agreed. Yeah, it was the easiest 14er I'd ever done. Although I did do Sherman. Sherman was also the hardest 14er I've ever done because we tried to do it in the wintertime, but it's another story. On the way out of the valley, we realized we had another night. We could stay. And Missouri was a little bit more demanding of a climb, and it was off the same valley, just on the other side from, where the cars drove through. And so we stopped at that trailhead, and it was going to be a long hike, this one. And we decided that, right there in the parking lot, you don't want to camp. So we decided to backpack up into some camping areas below tree line so that we could finish the climb the next day. Now, we hadn't planned to do this mountain. It wasn't part of the itinerary. We didn't have backpacks. We didn't even have our lightweight gear. We had car camping gear. And so I did have a rucksack, and we stuffed things in that, and Caleb had a little bag of some sort, and we stuffed things in that, and heavy gear without proper backpacks. But we hiked up to just below tree line, probably 11,500 feet, and we set up camp, and that night it rained cats and dogs. And I have to tell you, I was using at this time a two-man tent that I bought when I was 13 years old. That tent had been camped in, hundreds of times, backpacked in. It went all the way across Canada from Vancouver Island all the way to Quebec and back down to Oklahoma. That tent had weathered every condition. Matter of fact, it had broken poles. We still could pitch the tent, but broken poles from a near tornado windstorm that hit once when we were camping. It wasn't worthy. And this rainstorm was so cold, and it rained all night long, and we were getting wet inside of this tent. It helped. But, the tents we have these days are so much better. And I just remember Caleb and I in that tent just enjoying a moment of quasi-misery together, getting wet, trying to sleep in the cold, shivering in the damp, and quality time. Great conversations. A little scary, actually, had we bitten off more than we could chew. But the next morning dawned foggy, not rainy. And there was no energy in the clouds. Now, I'm not going to say that this is a safe decision, but having spent decades backpacking in the Colorado Rockies and around 14ers and what have you, I have a sense, it doesn't mean I'm always right, don't mistake this for pride, but I have a sense of the energy that's in the system. And I looked at Caleb and I said, you know, in these conditions, it may not be wise to try to do a 14er, but right now, there's no energy in this. This is not a thunderstorm. This is a cloud that's hovering on the peak. There's no high wind. There's no heavy rain. Nothing's happening that could create the lightning strikes we'd want to avoid. Now, our biggest concern was, what if the temperature dropped a little bit more and the rocks started to ice up? Because that can get very, very dangerous. But with the fog collecting on our hair and our eyebrows and our eyelashes, we decided to go on a hike. Now, if you attempt a 14er in these conditions, that's what you're doing. You're saying, I'm going on a hike. You're not trying to get to the summit. Don't get summit fever, because that can get you hurt. But you say, I'm going to go on a hike, and as long as the conditions allow, I'm going to enjoy this hike. And if we get to the summit, then hurrah. If we don't, we had a rewarding hike. So once again, it's about enjoying the present moment instead of just trying to accomplish the goal. The fog stayed until we got to the summit. But the conditions were stable, and the sun burned off the fog, and we had glorious views. From the top of Missouri, you can see Oxford and Belford and Harvard and all these other 14ers, but they were just dancing with the clouds. As the clouds were burning off, as the sun heated up, they were like wisps of blankets made of silk that were falling off the peaks and flowing over them just so beautifully. And Caleb and I stood in awe together, seeing one of the most beautiful views. But it wasn't a view. It was a video. It wasn't a picture. It was in action. It was alive. It was talking to us. If we could only have ears to understand what it was that it was trying to tell us. You know, on that hike, we saw something else. We saw a pine marten, and it had caught a pika. And this pine marten is, I don't know if you know, but they're like 6 or 8 inches long from nose to tail, tiny little guys, and they're in the weasel family. Anyway, it had caught a pika, and it carried the pika right under our feet as we're hiking on the trail, and it stopped and it looked at us with this pike in its mouth. The pika had to weigh almost as much as the marten. I mean, it was pikas are little, but martens are too. It was amazing. And he ran into his den and dropped off his pika and then came running back out to stand next to us and watch us walk by. Just because he was curious. What a beautiful, beautiful experience. Kind of felt bad for the pika. But you know, life requires sacrifice. We don't live without other things sacrificing for us so we can continue to live. It's another lesson we learned that day. We need to respect that sacrifice. That's part of taking care of the environment. That's part of responsible farming. That's part of nurturing nature. Because it takes care of us, and we must take care of it. Adventure sports. The things you can learn when you go and you experience and you do. I've been talking now for 45 minutes, and I've only scratched the surface. We did adventure travel. We did many more backpacking trips, many snow caves. We would get backcountry, cross-country skis, Nordic skis with metal edges. We'd rent them because we didn't own them. And we'd load up our backpacks and ski 5 miles, whatever it was, into the wilderness. And then we would build snow caves and spend the night. And Caleb loved this. Caleb loves winter. I think it takes the harsh conditions and also the beauty and the pristine purity of the snow. But he just loves winter. And learned so many things about survival, about safety. And by the way, if you've never built a snow cave before, they do take practice. Make sure that that's not your only way to survive the night, because they take a little know-how. Here's a tip or two for you. There are a lot of different styles. If you make a mound of snow and you expect to dig a cave in that mound, then the first thing is you have to pile that up early enough that the snow can consolidate so the crystals can interlock and so it'll have support. If you build the mound out of, especially in the cold, or if there's sugar snow, forget it. It'll never consolidate. But you must let it sit for a few hours so it'll be firm enough to be able to dig the cave inside. And if you rush it, it's going to fall in on you, and then you won't have a place to sleep. So there's one bit of advice. Another bit of advice is you can actually stack up your backpacks and bury them in the snow, and that gives you a head start on digging out your snow cave. Because once the snow does consolidate, you can pull the backpacks out, and you already have an opening formed by where they were, so you can expand that into an area big enough to sleep in. And you learn things like don't go to bed cold. So one night, we were cooking dinner. It's after dark. It's snowy, and our snow cave is good, but we were getting really cold. You eat, you get cold. You know, you're standing in the cold cooking, and the snow is really deep this time. Matter of fact, we tried taking off our skis, and we just fell into snow up to our waists. And so we spent most of the time either on our skis, but we also dug a pit that we could cook in so that we could kind of get out of the wind and also have a place to stand. But after dinner, we were freezing. So we put on our skis, and we did about a 2-mile ski in the dark in the beautiful moonlight. A beautiful moonlight, wintertime, cross-country Nordic experience so that we could get warm. And when we got back to our snow cave, we were warm. We crawled in our sleeping bags. And by the way, snow caves are very warm. I take a thermometer with me, and it's usually the temperature in there is the mid-50s when it might be 10 degrees outside. So they warm up from body heat, excellent insulation. Make sure you know how to make them, and make sure that you know how to make them safely. Okay? But we learned things from that. There was one more trip where there was a snow drift that was very well consolidated, and it was large enough. And we decided that we would just dig the snow caves into this snowdrift so we wouldn't have to make a mound. And so it was very well packed. And two things. We made 2 snow caves side by side. And then we decided that we'd make a little tunnel between them. There were, I think, 4 of us in the group. Anyway, we'd make a tunnel between them so we could talk back and forth. We thought that would be fun. And of course, you make a little air hole in the top so that you don't get too much carbon monoxide buildup in the cave. You get some fresh air exchange. And then usually you close the door. And the reason is because the wind will whip in there and it just freeze you all night long. Well, one of the guys that was with us was inexperienced, and he had to go use the restroom. So he went out from his sleeping bag, opened his door, and when he came back in, he didn't reclose his door. Didn't realize what was going to happen. And remember, we're on a snowdrift. This is where the wind whips and howls. It blew in that door and through that tunnel and up the little air holes that we had made, the chimneys we had made in the snow caves. And we were in a wind tunnel all night long. So cold. But we survived, and it was fun. And the next morning, one of the guys, the older guys that was with us, said, that was no fun. And he took off and just left. He grabbed his backpack, he grabbed his snowshoes, he says, I'll see you guys later. And he went back to his truck, hiked out of there. Well, it was so cold and so windy. Matter of fact, we were crossing a frozen lake later that day, and a gust of wind hit that was so strong, and a continuous wind. It was so strong we couldn't stand. It was blowing us backwards on the ice. We're slipping. Our feet are slipping. It's knocking us over. So we had to grab each other and lock each other in each other's arms so that we could walk into the wind and brace each other so it wouldn't blow us over. That means that the wind was about 100 miles an hour. And while it was blowing, trees were falling. And a tree snapped and fell across the lake, not where we were, thankfully. Crazy times. But, you know, the people on that trip also learned something about tenacity, survival, good ideas and bad ideas, and how decisions can impact people. Two things. We hiked up on top of a ridge, and actually, I'm mixing two stories. This is another one. But we had a glorious time, right? The other story was another snow cave adventure. We hiked on top of a ridge, and it was in springtime this time. And there was a wet slide avalanche that came down a distant mountain. And to watch the thunder as it came down the cliffs and heavy wet snow crashing into the valley floor and the echoes of thunder through the peaks. So amazing. And my nephew Sam was with us that time. We saw that. We saw marmots. And then we saw a golden eagle being chased by two ravens. Now, the ravens were probably nesting in the area, though I don't know that for sure. They're natural enemies. But these ravens were chasing the golden eagle that was soaring on the updrafts. And the eagle soared up to 13,500 feet and flew over the Continental Divide and disappeared with the ravens flapping and squawking behind him. My nephew Sam looked at me. At that moment, he had never been on a trip like this before, and he wasn't sure if he was enjoying it or not for the whole trip, the hike in, the night in the cold, all that stuff. But he looked at me at that moment and he said, I get it, Uncle Curtis. I get it. Quality time, magic moments, adventure sports. But back to the cold, cold, cold trip with the high winds and the trees falling on the frozen lake. We hiked around and enjoyed ourselves and had a glorious time. It was quite the experience. But here's the punchline. As we're hiking down the trail, following the snowshoe route that we had hiked up and the one that the adult fellow had hiked down, we were surprised to find that a mountain lion had followed him down the mountain for miles. Behind his snowshoe tracks, or on top of them, were mountain lion tracks, where he had been stalked and followed. Never knew it, and usually you don't. Those cats are stealthy. But it had tracked him down that trail for miles. You should have seen the look on his face when I told him later. Adventure sports. I could go for another 5 hours without having any problems about the mountain bike races, about the amazing ski trips, about snow caving, about backpacking, even about whitewater trips, about adventure travel. It just goes on and on and on. And in all of these experiences, we connected on a level that you just don't get in your daily routine. Parents, do adventure with your children. They will find out what kind of metal they're made of. They'll understand how to survive and make wise decisions. They'll learn tenacity and courage. They'll overcome fear. They'll gain self-confidence and self-respect. And they'll love you for it. Ann and I, our 4 kids are now all adults. And I would just feel so blessed. I'm not bragging. I'm telling you that it's probably because of things like these adventure sports. My teenage kids all knew that we loved them. and they loved us back. And the teenage years are supposed to be the troubled waters, the rocky times, the difficult transition from youth to adult. And we just had so much fun because we were together with each other, enjoying these things together. And it wasn't just Caleb. We did these trips with Daniel, Luke, Lydia, and Anne. Amazing times. But here's the point. This is the part that I wanted to come to and end the show with this. Caleb is getting married on Saturday. He has found the most remarkable woman, and he understood what quality was, and he wouldn't settle for less because he knew what real connection meant. And he knew what maturity was and courage was. And he found the most remarkable woman, and they fell deeply in love. And on Saturday, Caleb and Sarah are embarking on life's biggest adventure. The adventure of marriage and growing their own families and continuing the tradition of connection with each other and connection with their kids and with nature and all of creation, and learning things like tenacity and courage. And I just want to say, Caleb and Sarah, I couldn't be happier for you. And I dedicate this episode of the Adventure Sports Podcast to you. I love you guys, and I'm excited for your many, 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 many tomorrows. Thank you for listening to the Adventure Sports Podcast today. Thank you for putting up with just me rambling like this. But I wanted to honor Caleb. You know, I love my kids. They're all my best friends. And to see one of your best friends find the woman of his dreams and to get married and to move on into the life that they so much deserve makes a dad proud. Until the next show, parents, with your kids, get out there and have some fun.